Hey, church. Good to see you here. Glad you could be here. I'm not going to get in the way. Did we talk about this screen at all? Did anybody say anything? Some of you are like, what in the world? Why is there a giant TV on stage? Our projector went out. Oh, no. It may have been actually that lightning bolt that we had strike the church a while back, and it went out. So we're borrowing Steve's TV from his room. Tina said it was too big, so we just put it in here. No, we're probably going to make some adjustments and take that screen out, and you'll see some things week to week. But that's pretty nice, isn't it? It's pretty big. It's crazy how cheap these things have gotten. It is wild. Don't go searching Amazon to buy a TV. Just listen to the sermon. We're not talking about TVs. I did want to say one other thing, though, before we get too far along. I really firmly believe this. I'm not saying this just to make you think that things are good, but I really do believe God is working in and among our church family, that he's growing people, that it's about life change, that it's about, like what Steve said earlier, it's just about moving closer to Jesus, and if that's an inch or a mile, that's wonderful. We just want to move closer to Jesus, and it's all about that. And I just cannot wait to see what God has for us in this next season of church life. One of the ways that that things are changing and growing is we love announcing when people place membership here. And so today we're really excited to announce that the Beddicks, Alex, Catherine, and Dax, and one to be named later, are placing membership today. They're over there in the back, little wave. Family of four, we love having them. Catherine's from the south, but she's existing up here for Alex's sake and to be around their family up here, and they live over in Lake Elmo, and we're just so glad to have you guys here. All right, let's get started. I'm excited about today. I really am excited about what we have to talk about. And let me just, let's start with this. Let's set the field a little bit like this, and let's just ask the question about how often in life do you feel like you just need someone to tell you, it's okay, keep going, you're on the right track? Me too, all the time. I can't tell you this is all way before GPS, or at least way before everybody had a GPS in their car and on their phone. But do you remember being on a road trip and you were like zoning out? Maybe you were singing to a song and all of a sudden you looked up and you're like, did I miss a turn? Am I going the right way? Am I on the right track? And if you're like me, you were not going to pull over on the side of the road to unwind that giant atlas and figure out where you are and look. You were just going to try to determine, as you were doing 65 down the highway, whether or not this was right. And so you're going to look around you like, I don't know. Is the air feel like it's getting warmer? Am I heading south? Do the trees look like the leaves are changing? Am I on the right track? You just needed some way to know for sure if you were headed the right direction. It's that feeling, it's a combination of uncertainty, but searching. Uncertainty and just searching for signs and searching for clues and searching for hints. And I think life has a lot of that feeling in it. There's a lot of these moments where we're like, okay, am I on the right track? It can be as mild and minor as like working out. You're like, okay, I'm going to work out. I'm going to set myself a plan. You work out for a few weeks and you're like, I think I'm getting fatter and I don't know, am I doing something wrong? I don't think I weighed this much when I started. And you're like, well, but muscle weighs more than fat. I don't know. Parenting. Every time you like make a parenting choice and it doesn't work out like you imagined, it doesn't end like a Hallmark movie, and you're like, am I doing the right thing? You get an email from a teacher and you're like, I think I may need to am I doing the right thing? Is this right? I thought it was right. I got this advice from some wise people. Am I doing right? Marriage? Man, why aren't we Chip and Joanna Gaines yet? Is my marriage good? Is it working? Is it heading the right direction? Am I doing the right things? And am I make prayer? Have you ever had this happen where you're like, I'm going to commit to praying. I'm going to get on my knees. I'm going to ask God to lead me and guide me and give me direction. I'm going to dedicate my life. I'm going to surrender. And then it just feels like life gets worse and harder. And you're like, this is not the way it's supposed to work. Am I doing the right thing? Am I heading the right direction? And it's such a common experience that we just need someone to come along, put their arm around us and say, you're good, keep going. This is part of it. This is the way it is. It'll feel like this sometimes, but you're good. Keep it up. We are in the final message of the Exiles series that this is 9 weeks we've been in this series, and I have loved it, probably way more than anybody else. And the whole series, we've been covering the book of Daniel. And it's been 9 weeks, and it's been a wild ride in Daniel. And it is super fun to study. The book of Daniel is fun because not only do you have these really familiar passages, and you're like, well, how am I going to teach anybody about this? Because they've been learning about Daniel in the lion's den since they were 2 years old back in Kingdom Club. How am I going to tell anybody anything different or new? And then you get into a part of Daniel, you're like, these are weird dreams. How are you supposed to preach this? Now, if you don't recall, that's okay. The whole book, the whole story of Daniel takes place during a national time out, so to speak. God has put the entire nation of Israel, the divided kingdom, he's put them on probation. If you would imagine it like a job, right after God hired Israel to be his employee, Israel totally started stealing office supplies, and they started causing problems, and they made a ruckus, and they got bad job review after bad job review for 800 years. They just kept messing up, and God kept warning them. He sent prophet after prophet after prophet, and sometimes they would have this little increase just for a little bit, and then they would go right back down. It just couldn't get it figured out, and finally God said, enough. We have to banish you. And you want to follow idols? You want to worship other gods? Then I'm going to send in a country where these gods reign, where these gods rule, and they're going to take you off. And they're exiles in another country. This is what's been happening this whole time. And so things in the story begin, or they seem dark. It seems bleak. But there's this little glimmer of hope and of light, and your attention is on really just this one character, although there's a few others. Your attention is really on this one person. There's this hope is not entirely lost. It made me think of The Princess Bride when Wesley they thought was dead, and they took him to the magic guy, and he said, well, he's not dead, he's just mostly dead. And the nation of Israel is not dead, but it is mostly dead. There is hope, there is a glimmer of light, there is going to be a return. God still has a plan, and we learn about it in the book of Daniel. Later on, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, this is the beginnings of it. He says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man. We would come to know that that's Jesus' favorite term for himself. He used that more than anything else. And he's coming with the clouds in heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, and we learn that that's God. He approached Yahweh and was led into his presence. And Jesus was given authority and glory and sovereign power over all nations and peoples of every language, and they worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Daniel is being told this, this is the stuff he's learning when he's at his lowest, at the bottom of the pit. When things are not looking good, he's told there will come a kingdom. Imagine how hard that was to believe. Imagine how that felt like being on a road trip and thinking, I don't think we're heading in the right direction. I don't think this looks good. I don't think this is right. And you needed someone to come along and say, nope, keep going, you're good. We learn later that this passage was fulfilled by Jesus in Matthew chapter 28 when Jesus went to his followers and he said, all authority has been given on heaven and earth has been given to me. And then he says, go make disciples of all nations. But this was the vision. And Daniel had to have thought, listen, it's just like, it's me. And we hear about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but just a little bit. We don't hear much about them. It's just a few of us. Our country is wiped off the map. How are you going to resuscitate this dead thing and make it something triumphant and glorious? How is that supposed to happen? It's halftime. All the starters are injured, and we're down 1,000,000-0. Why would we keep going? This, if anything, it's time to give up. And Daniel needs someone to come alongside him and say, hey, it's okay. Keep going. Look forward. You're headed in the right direction because this doesn't feel right or look right at all. So the book of Daniel is about the conviction to keep going when all the evidence, all the circumstances around you say, give up. To keep doing the right thing when everything is shouting at you to stop, quit, phone it in, just give up. And this is important. This is not false positivity or false optimism or toxic positivity. It's the confidence that God has a vision and there's a promise coming. It's knowing that God will outlast the kingdoms of man. And it forces us to ask this question here. Have I given up? You can keep coming to church, but have given up here and in here. You can occupy a seat, and you're like, well, I'm here. Yeah, but there is nothing about your life that is being transformed by the power and purpose of God. You have given up. You don't have to denounce Jesus to give up on Jesus transforming your life. You could just phone it in. A lot of us have and do. You don't have to disbelieve in God to live like you don't believe in God. There's ways to give up and still feel like you're kind of coasting in the right direction, but you don't really care anymore. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but there is a certain big box store where they wear blue vests, and sometimes you go to those employees and ask for help, and it just feels like those employees have given up on their jobs. Hey, do you know where the light bulbs are? I don't know, man. I just work here. I felt on more than one occasion, true story, I felt like I was trying to go to an employee and they saw me coming to them with a question and they sprinted away from me. I'm not here to help you. I just paycheck. I'm just moving along. Not all employees like that. There are certain employees that are wonderful. My dad works at a big box store where you wear a blue vest. He's a man of mystery, folks. You just don't ever know what he's doing. So Daniel is 6 chapters of stories, of these inspiring stories, of standing when you're commanded to bow, of praying when you're commanded to quit. It's inspiring story after inspiring story, and then you get 6 chapters of weird dreams. Let me give you a quick little taste of the weird dreams section. Daniel chapter 11, starting in verse 30. This is just 2 verses. For the ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened, and he will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise and desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Now you read a verse like that. Nobody reads this section of Daniel chapter 7 through 12, reads this and like, oh, so inspiring. God, that is what I needed to hear today. Thank you for providing that. No, we like the first 6 chapters where it's Daniel standing up to the authorities and obeying despite the cost. We get to this. In fact, it's a true story. You know, as in working through Daniel over the last 9 weeks, I've seen a lot of teaching on Daniel from other churches, other preachers, other sources. So many places stop teaching Daniel in chapter 6 because chapter 7 gets weird. It's like it's as if Daniel ends with, and God rescued Daniel from the lions, the end, let's just move along. And there's 6 more chapters, and it's strange, and people don't know what to do with it. This is true story. More than one commentary I read on this section of Daniel said, it is in our opinion that Daniel, this section of Daniel is unpreachable. So turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 11. Let's preach the unpreachable. I just want to offer 3 goals for our final message in this Exiles Daniel series. Number 1, we want to become one with the weirdness. We want to become one with the weirdness. We wonder, this is in Scripture. Why? What is God doing? How do we unwind it and understand it? It shouldn't feel like a dark, scary forest. We want to give you a flashlight and a map to navigate. Number 2, I want to show you one specific prophecy contained in these visions of Daniel that will knock your socks off. That is a guarantee from stage. If you're wearing your socks at the end of the service, something is wrong. It is unbelievable. All right? And then number 3, I just want to leave you with one profound truth. So let's start with the first goal, become one with the weirdness. This section of Daniel, 7 through 12, the weird dreams, can feel like dumping out, a 10,000 piece puzzle on a table and then discover that the pieces were in the wrong box and you don't even have the right picture on the cover. Like, where do you start? They've gotten really innovative with puzzles. My wife likes to do puzzles, and I tried to buy her there's these ones called impossible puzzles, and they're clear. Have you seen those? And they're in bizarre shapes, even for puzzles. Yeah, you can. Daniel, reading this section can feel like that. You're like, I've got this jumble of information. I just don't know where to go with it, how to sort it out, and I don't have any map. I don't have a picture on the cover of the box. Daniel, reading this section, can also feel like getting that burst of energy where you're like, today's the day. I'm going to clean the garage. I'm going to clean the closet. I'm going to organize today. And then you open up that closet and you're like, you know what? I'm going to take a nap today. That's what I'm going to do. You know that feeling where the energy just boom, feels like that. Reading this section of Daniel can feel like that. So you can get into this section of Daniel. You start to read this and you're confronted with this, what looks like just impossible. This is the beginning. Like, what do I do? 3 more kings will arise in Persia and the 4th. And, of course, I put a ton of text on here to just make you even feel tired looking at that, because that's how it feels to read into this section of Daniel. You're confronted with this. You're like, okay, I'm going to understand Daniel today. And then you're like, never mind. I'm going to watch Netflix instead, because it's daunting and you don't even know where to start. The cool thing is Daniel, the guy written about in this story, that this story centers around, felt that same thing. Look at what he says in Daniel chapter 8, verse 24. He says, I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and I went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. Daniel heard that vision and he said, I'm going to need a nap. Several days. And then I just got to get back to normal life because I don't know what this is about. So we've got to keep going. Let's get a picture on the cover of the box. Daniel chapter 7 through 12 can be summed up in 2 words, oversimplified in 2 words. The 2 words are beasts and battles. Beasts and battles. I want you to think of Daniel chapter 7 through 12 as if you're looking on Google Maps. You can. I love doing this. I can waste hours. When I start to feel overwhelmed, I just go to Google Maps and I just start looking at maps. I love geography. I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. This feels like this is a good way to begin to grasp it. You can start at the satellite level of your maps and you can just see over the whole world, mostly, a lot of the world. We're missing a lot of Asia, sorry. But you can see over a lot of the world. You can take in the big picture. Okay? Beasts and battles. That's the big picture of Daniel. But then Daniel, so that's chapter 7. But then Daniel chapter 8 starts to zoom in and talk about specific battles. So it's like you're looking at Google Maps, but you're now looking at the metro area of Minneapolis. This is our metro area. I thought it would be fun to put these markers on here. These markers are places that people drive from to attend our church. And I don't even have them all on there. We got people way over in Carver. I've never even been over. That's so far away. I don't have the time to drive over there and see it. It's so far, but I believe they're watching online today. Good job. We got people from up in Blaine. We got people from, I don't even know where this is. Oh, this is our church. Where is this supposed to be? This is Woodbury. We got people from here. I didn't even put Red Wing down. There's people from Red Wing. I mean, people driving from all over. Some of you are like, yeah, that's me. Thank you so much. This is Daniel chapter 8, some of chapter 9, chapter 10, and just maybe a hint of chapter 11 is you get a little closer view. It's the same story, beasts and battles, but now you're zooming in on a little bit more specifics. There's some prophecy stuff in there that's pretty interesting. And then finally you get to drone level. That's the next one here. And there's our church building. I think this is probably me, Presley, and Steve. I don't actually know. But that's our cars right there. If you zoom way in, and Daniel chapter 11 has a story that is just zoomed way in. So what you're seeing when you read chapter 7 is this big picture, and then you take in chapter 8, and you're like, okay, it's getting a little more zoomed in, and then 11 is just this crazy, detailed story of what happens. Here's the problem with us as humans. There's many of them, but one of the problems is we lack the capacity to see all these levels at one time. We can only look at the global satellite view, or we can look at the first person point of view. We can't see everything all at once. We just don't have it. And I'm not sure if this works this way, but it feels like this. And maybe this is a feature of getting older, but it feels like as I get older, my brain capacity is diminishing. Does anybody else feel like that? And now I have to be cautious about what information I put in my brain, because if I remember that, well, then something else is going to go away. So I can remember who won the Oscar, what movie won the Oscar for Best Picture 2 years ago, but forget remembering my Amazon password. It's like you can have one or the other. Or maybe I'll remember like some NBA statistics that I find interesting, but forget knowing where your keys are. It's like your brain can only occupy certain amounts of information. Our hard drive is only so big. We have limited capacity. We can't keep all these levels in our mind at once. It's hard for us, seriously, it's hard for us to have perspective on like tragedy in the Middle East when you're sitting at your doctor's office and you're about to hear the reports of the test. And some people, they're focused on tragedies in the Middle East and they're upset at the rest of the world for not being as focused, but our human capacity lacks the ability to do all that at once. We have a hard time holding that all together. This is so crucial. This is so important. Daniel is communicating to us through these weird dreams that God has infinite capacity. God has infinite capacity. We make two mistakes when we think about this. We think our little problems can't really matter to God because there's big problems in the world. But that's a human mistake we're making. That's the problem of us trying to figure out how do we process both our little issues that we wrestle with and the big problems that are going on in the world. We think our little problems don't matter, or we make the mistake of thinking our little problems are all that matters. And there's nothing else that we should care about. But here's the important thing for us to remember. God can be concerned about suffering in Israel and Lebanon and Palestine, and he can be deeply concerned about the fact that your 3-year-old lost their favorite stuffed animal. Those two things, God, who is infinite, has the capacity to care about both those things. God can care about someone who's suffering tremendously because they've just received a terrible medical diagnosis, and God can also be concerned about the fact that you hurt your ankle a little bit and you're a little upset about that. God has the capacity to care about both those things. We don't, but God does. God cares about global suffering, and he cares about your suffering. God cares about human trafficking, and he cares about your pornography problem. God cares about both those things. He can hold both those things in his mind. God has infinite capacity. He doesn't have to choose. There are bigger problems in the world than ours. There are. But that doesn't mean God doesn't care about ours. There are bigger issues to deal with, but that doesn't mean God doesn't care about our issues and want to do something about them. There are bigger sins in the world than yours, but that doesn't mean he doesn't care about yours. Matthew chapter 10, verse 29 and 30, God knows every sparrow that falls, but he's not holding that knowledge at the expense of anything else. He can do it all. Infinite capacity. And these visions remind us that God has this infinite capacity. All right, let's zoom in, and we're going to look at a specific prophecy. And it's one of those things you're going to feel like, I feel like I'm in class for a minute, but I just want you to buckle up. Pay attention for a second, because this is the type of thing that I think you can walk out of church today thinking, my mind is blown. Now, some of you are just like super skeptical and you're just like going to fight it. That's okay. I don't mind at all. Let's talk about it. But this is such a good reminder. It has the potential in times that it's going to feel completely unrelated to pop back into your mind and think, well, if God knew that, then he knows this. And this is going to be important. All right, so let's do this. Let's go back to that passage I read that seems so odd. Daniel 11:30. For the ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be. Now I'm highlighting some words that I want you to pay attention to. For the ships of Kittim will come against him, therefore he will be disheartened, and he will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Next slide, if you would. I think I skipped one, but it's okay. We're going to go back. Verse 32, by smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly towards the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. This is a prophecy coming in on the middle of the story, okay? Spoiler alert, and 99.9% of reputable scholars and theologians read this section of Scripture and they say, we think that this section of Scripture is talking about one individual person, all the same guy, a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. Now here's why I said you got to just buckle up for a second, because you're like, all right, I see a Latin name there, I'm already out. But hold on, okay? Most scholars think what we just read is about this guy right here. This guy was a bad dude. He would make bad people in our era look like Sunday school kids. He was bad news. Now, he gave himself the name Epiphanes. He said, that's my name, and that means I am God revealed. Can you imagine giving yourself a nickname? Like, if you had a nickname, yeah, people call me Sparky or whatever. But can you imagine, what do people call you? God revealed. Like, all right, dude, you need to tone it down. And so he called himself that, but behind his back, they called him Epimanes, which means madman, Antiochus madman. That's what they called him. Now, Antiochus, okay, this is history books. You can read this in several different historical resources. Antiochus went to fight against Egypt. He was a Greek king, part of Alexander the Great. Empires fell apart. He was part of the Seleucid Empire. Anyway, he went to fight Egypt, and to fight Egypt, he had to march right past Jerusalem to get there. So he's on a road trip, and he's like, Jerusalem, okay. And he goes to fight Egypt. When he gets to Egypt, he gets into Alexandria. He's on the beach of Alexandria, and there's a Roman, not an Egyptian, but a Roman ambassador who meets him on the beach. The Roman ambassador just has a few soldiers with him, very casual. The Roman ambassador looks at him and he says, hey, you need to get out of here. Antiochus has a huge army, and Antiochus is like, no. And the Roman ambassador, because Rome is an up-and-coming nation, empire in this era, he says, if you don't turn around right now, Rome, you're at war with Rome. And Antiochus says, okay, let me think about it. Let me talk to my advisors and think about it. And the Roman ambassador said, actually, sir, no. And he took a stick and he drew a circle around Antiochus. And he said, if you step outside of that circle without deciding you're surrendering, you are at war with Rome. This is literally where we get the phrase line in the sand. It's from that moment where that ambassador said, you need to turn around right now. So Antiochus, because he was prideful and angry and evidently a little crazy judging by his nickname, he, humiliated, leaves this encounter and makes his way back home. What city does he have to go by on his way back? Jerusalem. And he's mad. He's full of rage, and he is unhinged. And just like any bully, they're going to pick on somebody weaker. They're going to take out that rage on somebody weaker than them. And Antiochus unleashes his fury on the people of Jerusalem. So he does all these insane things. He makes practicing Judaism punishable by death. Anything. You must not eat kosher, or we will kill you. You must not circumcise your sons, or we will kill you. He burns copies of the Torah. He builds an altar to Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem. A horror of horrors. He murders thousands of Jews. He incites this Maccabean revolt. This is pretty cool. I'd love to talk about this more. But he incites this revolt, finally, that actually results in the holiday of Hanukkah. It's a very, very interesting story. But anyway, and I highlighted this one because this is just really what got everybody furious. A pig, which is an unclean animal, he took and he sacrificed in the temple, and he spread its entrails all over the temple. And then he had his soldiers do stuff in the Holy of Holies that if I told you what his soldiers did, I would lose my job because I cannot talk about that sort of thing from the stage. It was awful, awful, awful. It was just the worst scenario a Hebrew person could imagine finding themselves in. Anyway, Daniel chapter 11, verse 30. For the ships of Kittim, which is an old school way of saying Rome, will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened, lying in the sand, and he will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. Forces from him will arise, and they will desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Oh, man. Very interesting, huh? Now, some of you are like, well, that's pretty interesting, but yeah, you can be skeptical. I don't care. It's fine. Some skeptics have said, we don't think Daniel is prophecy because it's too accurate. Daniel had to have been written after the events it describes rather than before because it's too accurate. That's a good challenge. What should we think about this challenge? I don't think the point I'm about to make can be made strongly enough, okay? Even if you are the greatest skeptic in the world, you have to contend with this fact. Even if you think the Bible is fairy tales, you must contend with this fact. If Daniel wrote the story, Daniel lived around 500 BC. If he wrote the story. The complaint is, well, Daniel didn't write it. Somebody later pretending to be Daniel wrote it, and he'd already known everything that was going to happen, and there's just no evidence, blah, 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 blah. It's too accurate. So maybe Daniel didn't write it. What if somebody else wrote it? I suppose, all right, we have translations of Daniel into the Greek language that date to 200 BC. 200 BC. Translations, meaning that it's earlier than that, but they had at least decided this was worthy of translating into Greek by 200 BC. So it can go earlier, but you can get copies of what's called the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, and we have evidence that they go back to about 200 BC. So the latest, very latest, even if Daniel was translated immediately, Daniel's like writing it down and the guy's translating it immediately. The very latest is about 200 BC. Antiochus Epiphanes can be firmly dated by historians to 164 BC. Meaning that a person can virtually hold in their hands documents that were written at very least 33 years before the events they describe. Now, Christians are saying, oh, those documents were written 386 years before the events they describe. You don't have to believe. You can choose either one. You're either choosing that's predicting things 33 years in advance, or you're predicting things almost 400 years in advance. Either way. Either way. You would be impressed if I said, I know where you're going for lunch today, and I was right. You would be impressed if I knew what was happening 33 minutes from now, and we have evidence that these documents were written at least 33 years. Here's the problem with what I'm saying, is that some of you are like, 33 years before the events took place, we can hold in our hands the record of those events happening. This book of Daniel, contained in this book called the Bible, pretty impressive. And if you're sitting there in a moment and you're just like, man, I know Jesus said, he said to love your enemies, but I just don't feel like I'm getting anywhere doing that. I just don't feel like that's the right thing to do. He said to forgive, and it just doesn't feel like that's working. But if I know that these scriptures inspired by God are contained, that have evidence that they were written by a God who can write history in advance, boy, that gives me a lot more confidence in these things that I'm reading and living them out. We should be blown away and in awe of a God who writes history in advance. We should be blown away. Number 3, you're like, okay, that's fine, cool, interesting, but what do beasts and battles and visions and dreams have to do with me in my zip code and my daily life right now? It's interesting because Daniel himself had that complaint in Daniel chapter 12, verse 8. He wrote, I heard, but I did not understand, right? And you're like, yes, I agree, Daniel. So I asked, my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? How is this helpful to me? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. And in that case, the end means the end of what was being spoken of in those visions. God, I'm still kind of confused, trying to head the right direction, but I'm not sure. Several years ago, one of my daughters was babysitting for someone, and they were babysitting in the deep, dark country of Wisconsin. And they had gotten over there, and even though they had phones and GPS, they just got turned around and confused and couldn't figure out where they were relative to where they were supposed to be going. And so I got a call saying, Dad, please help me. And I'm at home. I'm, 30 miles away. But I have Find My Friends on my phone. And so I can pull up the satellite view and I can see where my daughter is and I can see where she's supposed to be going and I can give her turn-by-turn directions to get there from my perspective, from my point of view. And the cool thing in that particular story is she was going the right way. And I said, sweetie, just keep going the way you're going and you will get there. Don't we need someone who can see that satellite view to look down at us and speak to us and say, keep doing what you're doing. Keep being faithful. Keep repenting. Keep praying. Keep loving. Keep forgiving. I know it feels hard in the moment, and I know it feels confusing, and I know you don't know what's around the corner, but I can see. Keep doing what you're doing. You're good. This is the last verse in Daniel. This is the last verse in Daniel. Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. As for you, Daniel, go your way. I mean, Daniel to this point has been unbelievable. I mean, Daniel, 5 stars, man, on doing what you're supposed to do. There's just no record, at least in the text, that he ever messed up or lost faith. Daniel, go your way. Keep heading that direction. Keep walking the way you're walking. Keep being faithful. Go your way till the end, and you will rest. And this is so fascinating because this is one of the first glimpses that we get in the the Old Testament of the coming resurrection. It doesn't talk about it a lot, but it's so interesting here. He says, and at the end of days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Keep going. Keep going. If you're on the right path, keep going. If you're like, I don't know if I'm on the right path, I should talk to somebody. Well, come talk to somebody. Do something. Make a step. Take some initiative. Figure out what you need to do to keep going. If there is a next step for all of us. There's a next step for you. Like Steve was saying, there's something that you can do that's next. There's something ahead of you. There's a next step on your path forward. For some of you, that's like, I've just got to figure out, I've got to declare that I actually believe this stuff. I don't know that I've ever said that out loud. For some people, it's like, I'm going to get baptized. I've got stuff in my life and I just want all that washed away and I want a fresh start. That's the next step. For some people, like Steve said, it's coming to Bible class. How self-serving. He's the Bible class teacher and he's all saying, you come to Bible class. But maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Maybe you need to get deeper in the Word with some other people. Maybe you need to be involved in a small group, but there is a next step, and it's so dangerous for us as humans when we cannot see where we're going that we just stop moving. Keep going. If you're doing the right thing, keep going. I'm going to ask the praise team to come up here on stage, and we're going to close out with a song together. I just want to end with this challenge. Is that nobody else can make that step for you. Nobody else can do that for you. You have to be the one who takes that step, whether it's a step of faith. Maybe it's as simple as you've got a family member you need to reconcile with, and you know you need to forgive them. You don't want to forgive them, but you know it needs to happen. Might as well happen around Thanksgiving time, right? Let's do it now. Or maybe it's just as simple as you just need to repent of some stuff. It's weighing on your heart, and you come to church week after week after week, and it's on your mind, and you're like, no, that would be embarrassing to talk to somebody. Nobody can make that decision for you. You have got to make it. There is a step, And I'm just telling you to keep going your way till the end. There will be a time till you die and you rest, but you will rise again to receive your allotted inheritance. That is what God has in store for each one of us who follows after Christ. Let's stand together and let's sing as we close.